Welcome, everybody. I'm Peter Roskam. I'm the leader of the federal policy team here at BakerHostetler, and welcome to this conversation this afternoon where, with my partner, who I'm going to introduce in a minute, Edgar, we're going to talk about the impact of the new presidency and Congress on the financial services industry. And there's so much going on. Kevin and I spoke earlier today, and I said, well, Kevin, is there anything else going on? He goes, well, other than the breaking news, so I mean, it's like this cascading pace of change and the announcement of personalities in particular. We thought it would be interesting to take a view into some of these personalities. And to do that, I think the person that is really well equipped to give us that view and perspective is Edgar. Kevin is a partner at BakerHostetler. He's in the federal policy practice, and he comes with a really interesting background in financial services. Prior to joining Baker, he was at the House Financial Services Committee for 12 years. His latest responsibility there was as chief counsel. So in that role, Kevin was overseeing a number of these agencies that we're going to be talking about during the webinar. He was in close proximity and working closely with both House and Senate leadership on very, very significant pieces of legislation, including TARP, including Dodd-Frank, and everything in between, up and down the aisle. And also working closely with his counterparts in the Senate at the Senate Banking Committee. So he understands the sort of the nature of congressional oversight of the SEC and PCAOB and FINRA and the Financial Oversight Standards Board and others that have come before him as a senior staff member. And then prior to joining the House of Representatives on staff, he worked at PCAOB, and he was at the New York Stock Exchange as well. So, Kevin, it's great to move our text messaging back and forth about what's been going on into a discussion about some of these personalities. So, kind of as an overview, before we get into real detail, what's your sense as somebody who's seen administrations come and go over the years about how the Trump team is approaching this general round of appointments as it relates to financial services?
Absolutely, and it's great to be with you this afternoon, Peter, for our chat. Very different than what we saw 8 years ago. First, it was new to President Trump. He came to Washington as an outsider, came in without the background of, or as compared to his predecessors, perhaps. But this time, very different. He moved very quickly. It's clear he had a lot of his appointees and nominees ready to go. He started out, obviously, with his national security and foreign affairs and diplomacy teams. And late last week, we finally did receive our nominees for two financial services industry nominees, the Treasury Secretary and the HUD Secretary. We're still waiting on a couple of the key White House economic team members, the National Economic Council Director and the chair of the Council of Economic Advisors. And then, of course, we will get into all of the alphabet soup of regulator nominees, whether that's the SEC or the FDIC. We will hopefully have a name for the comptroller of the currency. We will have potentially, not even though it's not within the Financial Services Committee's jurisdiction, a CFTC chair nominee. And then, of course, the unders and the deputy secretaries, at least at Treasury, will all start to come out. Just by way of reference, for the first term of President Trump, the SEC chair nominee at the time, Jay Clayton, wasn't named until January 4th, and then formally nominated the day the president took office, January 20th of 2017. So we very well may have those names much sooner, and potentially before the end of the year. which will allow the Oversight Committee, the Banking Committee in the Senate to be able to schedule those hearings fairly quickly and get people into place potentially sooner than they would have been 8 years ago.
What's your sense? What looking at a number of the appointments in President Trump's first term to this term, one of the things that I think distinguishes some of them is that this time around he's got a personal relationship with many of these people. These are not people who, House or Senate Republicans are saying, "Hey, here's my, here's so and so. I think he'd make a great cabinet secretary." And you almost got that sense last time, but now it's people with whom the president feels a level of personal connection and personal confidence. Senator Rubio, Representative Stefanik, Representative Waltz, and so forth. Now, even a controversial figure like Matt Gaetz, who is now been withdrawn. But you take my point. There's this level of connectivity, and that's on the foreign policy side is an area that is newer to him than these financial relationships. This is somebody who's had an entire career in the financial sector. How do you think that inures to, number one, the nature of his choices, and number two, how he's going to be focusing in on the industry? What difference does that make?
Yeah, it's a really good question. There were a number of names for the Treasury Secretary, right? That's the preeminent position that we have nominated so far. And there seemed to be a lot of different voices putting in their particularly favored candidate for Treasury Secretary. He chose Scott Bessent, who it's unclear what their relationship is. Not 100% sure. I don't want to speculate. But will that nominee influence potentially other nominees that come down the chain into the independent agencies, such as the SEC or the CFPB or the FDIC, as we move further into the transition? We all know the president has a lot of advisors, a lot of people that he listens to. I'm sure they're all recommending very solid names for him to consider for these positions. And I think, the key is being able to effectuate the agenda. The earlier you can get someone nominated, the earlier you can get them confirmed, and then the earlier they can get to work, and you move away from an acting situation to a permanent leader of an agency or a department. And then that person can start to get the ball rolling on really examining everything that's happened the last 4 years, whether it's rulemakings, whether it's guidance, whether it's been allocation of resources, whether it's been message and agenda. It certainly seems that President Trump is moving aggressively to fill out the cabinet and the agency heads, his administration, as quickly as he can.
Make of sort of the aggressive push at the very beginning, right after the election, about recess appointments in the U.S. Senate, and it seemed controversial. It seemed aggressive. It strikes me now, just as somebody who's been in conversation with a number of folks who have reason to know that they're not feeling Republican senators are not feeling pressure for recess appointments anymore. That's kind of waned a little bit, but they are feeling pressure to get the job done. To deal with these appointments, get them disposed of, get them moving very, very quickly. What do you think that means in terms of, Chairman Scott at the Banking Committee, and is he going to be spending months in this process of hearings and so forth? You've been a close observer of this over the years.
So what's interesting, unlike President Trump's first term, he doesn't have a Fed chairman to nominate right now, doesn't have a vice chairman for supervision to nominate right now. Both of those folks are still in their positions for another 2 years. So that would take up time at the Banking Committee. Banking Committee, right off the bat, has the HUD nominee, Mr. Turner. Theoretically, Chairman Scott could start those hearings. Like the Senate will come in on January 3rd. We'll do the swearing in. That's a Friday. Assuming things are ready to go, a hearing could start that following week. Senator, incoming Majority Leader Thune has said he wants to have as many hearings ready to go so that votes can happen as soon as the president is in office, which would be the 20th. And, you know, traditionally, after the ceremonies and the festivities of the inauguration have left the Capitol, the Senate typically goes into session and starts to tee up votes on nominees. So could a Marco Rubio be ready to go on the 20th? Very possible. Could Elise Stefanik be possible? Could the Treasury Secretary be possible? That's done in the Finance Committee and not banking. But clearly, you want to have some core cabinet members confirmed that first week. Then really it depends on the pace and the timing of getting the paperwork, as they say, up to the Committee of Jurisdiction for that, considering that nomination. But I could certainly imagine Senator Scott at the Banking Committee at probably a good chunk of January into February, at least initially. Could go into March. It just depends on the pace and the timing, because some of the undersecretaries and at Treasury go through the Banking Committee, so he'll have to process those nominations. We know there's going to be 3 nominees at the SEC, right? Gary Gensler's announced he's leaving. Commissioner Lizarga has announced he's going to be leaving. That opens up 2 spots. There's also Commissioner Crenshaw's term has expired. Do they nominate a new Democrat potentially for that seat? She can stay, of course, until the end of next year if she's not formally renominated. So you could combine some people into one hearing. You could do a couple of SEC commissioners potentially. You might do the chair separate. All depends on what Senator Scott's prerogatives are. But there's plenty. There will be plenty of business for him to process. Plus, he's got to get into the blocking and tackling, right? We always have the monetary policy and state of the economy hearing in February with the Fed chair. That will be his first opportunity as chairman of the committee to welcome Chairman Powell into that hearing, also known as the Humphrey Hawkins hearing. So you have the normal business of the Senate, plus the committee nominations, plus the receiving of starting to do oversight hearings on topics of interest that Chairman Scott may have. So you got 3 buckets that you're moving around, and really it's a pace of how the White House will send over nominees and then the processing of them through the committee.
Seems like there's going to be a lot of pressure to get a Treasury Secretary in place quickly and to get the tax team in place quickly, because as we know, it's 2025 is a tax Armageddon. There will be lots of pressure on Congress to move before the expiration of these matters. The president made big commitments during the course of his campaign in terms of not taxing overtime, not taxing tips, not taxing Social Security and other things. They've made commitments in terms of the state and local tax deduction, of which I know you, Kevin Edgar, are now a single issue voter. But these are big agenda items that are before the Senate Finance Committee, and at the same time dealing with these personnel matters. So the announcement by Gary Gensler that he's stepping down, is that par for the course? Was that was there some scuttlebutt around that churning, or what? Were you surprised by that or no?
Ultimately, no, but it kept us in suspense. It has been the tradition that when the White House switches parties, that the chair of the SEC and the CFTC resign effective right before the inauguration. Of course, Chair Gensler had 2 years, well, a little less than 2 years on his term. He could have gone down to become a commissioner and stayed. ultimately, he chose to leave or will leave in on January 20th. So ultimately, no, not surprised that he made that decision. But it now allows for whoever President Trump names as the acting chair to start to think about, okay, what am I going to do in that period between acting chair and permanent chair? Um, a lot of if you look at the SEC's regulatory flexibility agenda, which they publish a couple of times a year, a lot of those items that are in the sort of working phase are not going to be moving forward. An acting chair can start to redirect staff on projects, can start to maybe focus on having the staff tee up clearer guidance, could focus on maybe there have been a lot of questions that have been coming into the agency on a topic, putting out answers to questions. So there's a lot of things that can be done, and starting to redirect staff to working on what will be priorities for the next 4 years.
Invite folks, if you've got a question for Kevin or me, but mostly for Kevin, then just go to the Q&A. I know there's a couple there now, and we'll get to them, but feel free to go to the Q&A section and submit your question, and we'll come back and revisit that. Kevin, how much pressure, or how much, not pressure, how much interest do you think there's going to be on the part of the administration on the Congressional Review Act? That is, going back at late breaking or lately promulgated matters at the end of the Biden administration that are now subject to review. They are privileged motions then in the Senate, meaning it's not subject to the Senate filibuster. President Trump signed 15 or 16 of these in his first term. What do you think the industry should be expecting here, if anything?
It's a great question. I had the opportunity and the responsibility to manage 3 of those CRA motions, 2 from the CFPB, 1 from the SEC. There is a sequence, there is a timing when they ripen. That's very important. You work closely with the House parliamentarian, Senate parliamentarian to make sure that you can offer the resolution, because there's a sequence, right? The rule goes final. The GAO then certifies that the rule is final, or the Government Accountability Office, Congress's independent auditor. And then that would then tee up when that CRA can move forward. So really, we're looking at anything from August, I think, Peter, of this year.
Right.
Anything since August that is certainly ripe. And really, I think President Trump has said for every 4 regulations they eliminated, or it was 4 to 1. 4 were removed or were rewritten or changed for every new one. Is that number going to be higher? Very well could be. Certainly agencies have the ability to go back in and amend rules that they've written and finalized, and they can modify them. But the real beauty of the CRA is that if Congress does pass the disapproval, the agency has to put forth a substantially different rule. They can't just tweak a little bit of what they did the first time. And so some agencies have been unable to put forth a substantially different rule. I think there'll be a great amount of interest moving as many of those as possible. And really, if agencies feel the need to go final on something now, they're doing so at peril that well, either legally it's going to be challenged, or CRA is going to be used, or both.
Yeah. Just to be clear, the look back period that you were referring to, that's 60 legislative days. So that's why you came up with your August timing. And legislative days are kind of like 2 minutes in NFL. I mean, you can get a lot done in 2 minutes. So they're sort of dog years. So it goes through, from August on, which is quite a long time. And you got to be thinking that the Biden administration is well aware of this and understands this dynamic, but it's something that has changed. Let me ask you, you were talking about, the series of hearings that are to be expected. And there's been over the past few years, the big banks will come in, the CEOs, they'll a lot of finger wagging towards them, a lot of admonition and judgment and so forth. Are we going to be looking at that again, or will are we going to look at a different trajectory? And the reason I'm asking this, Kevin, is it's based on this populist dynamic within the GOP that is suspicious of big things. The chairman of the Ways and Means Committee attended our legislative seminar, Jason Smith, and he told our audience that when he was whipping the Smith-Wyden tax bill earlier this year, he was encountering House Republicans who were asking him why he wasn't raising the corporate rate. Now, I don't think the corporate rate's going to go up, and I'm not shifting this into a tax discussion, but I'm interested in the the direction that a Republican trifecta is going to be taking financial services policy with the stipulation of kind of a shifting GOP that's not necessarily just the Wall Street Journal editorial page anymore.
Absolutely. So I can speak to when I was on the Financial Services Committee. We didn't ignore the large banks at all. If you all recall the London whale experience that JP Morgan went through, big hearing there, Wells Fargo's challenges and issues with the accounts that were inappropriately opened, and the issues that Wells Fargo went through with bonuses being given out for accounts and credit card openings that were fake. Wells Fargo came in when there was the major breach at one of the credit bureaus. So we responded to big events where members are hearing from their constituencies, hearing about problems that affect them personally. Now, will there continue to be a push for regulatory relief for small community financial institutions across the country? Absolutely. Will there be a push on the capital formation agenda to help small companies access the equity markets and investors in a more modernized, more thoughtful way that think about our securities laws much differently than they were written in the 30s and early 40s? Absolutely. You've got Tim Scott wanting to have a priority of housing. That has been a passion of his, right? So you've got a housing issue that he wants to work on. You've got how are these regulators that are going to come in modify what has been done? Now, does that help everyone? Does that help some? Right? Some of these regulations are written in such a broad way they capture everyone. So you're looking for a variety of opinion. But I think one area that will really change is the work of, and we've talked about this, Peter, in other conversations, about the work of the Financial Stability Oversight Council and designating non-banks as systemic. That work is probably being shelved or will be shelved, right? Because that's adding more regulation onto businesses. That's adding more government oversight. That's adding more really to the big potentially. Right. And I don't think this administration is going to be interested in that type of work. Look, there are qualified regulators who can regulate the entities under their jurisdictions. And if they need help from Congress, they can go to Congress directly. But these agencies have a lot of breadth that they can use. Obviously, cautioning with the Supreme Court decisions, right, on Chevron and the major questions doctrine in the prior term. But agencies can respond to challenges that they are seeing from their entities that they're regulating.
Let's go to a question.
Sure.
Here's one. With the expected regulatory purge, how much do you expect, quote, good regulations to be impacted? For example, the OCC's third-party risk management regulations, Bank Secrecy Act, anti-money laundering requirements, et cetera. How much of a sledgehammer are they going after this stuff?
Those types of rules keep our financial system safe. right?
You don't think those wouldn't be at risk?
Those are not the types of rules that I think of at risk, right? Um, Third party oversight of vendors and outside providers. There's a whole push in the EU for that as well. That, gosh, we could do a whole webinar on that, Peter. That could be coming over to the United States.
Yeah.
I think you're going to see this administration not wanting to see European rules come on to the U.S. entities.
Right.
So there'll be a big focus there. And there is an ambassador to the EU that the president will get to pick at some point, who will probably have a lot to say. But rules about that come out of FinCEN or deal with money laundering, know your customer, Bank Secrecy Act, those are rules that preserve the integrity of the financial system. Wouldn't see those on the chopping block unless they are so broad. And the one we have heard a lot about is that Corporate Transparency Act, which is coming into compliance early next year, which can hit some small businesses really hard. Could that be a rule ripe for tailoring, modifying? There was a lot of differing opinions of Republicans and Democrats about how broadly that rule should be implemented. That's possibly one. Yeah.
Okay. Let's go to another question.
Yeah.
This is kind of a little bit of a tax question, so
Okay.
let me take a swing at it. Very concerned about HR 9495 type bill, which I'm not familiar with off the top of my head, but by reading the question, I'm kind of intuitive on what it means, that may pass in the next month on nonprofits with its sweeping removal of due process for removing 501c3 status for nonprofits. Can you speak to the prospect for what the new Secretary of Treasury could do under this type of law? I think that nonprofits are going to be under a lot of scrutiny, and it manifests itself, I think, in two ways. One is foundations are going to find themselves, I think, more subject on the revenue side. That is particularly educational foundations, and this is deeply connected to the manifestation of anti-Semitism that we saw on campuses in these past several months. So, does the Treasury Treasury Secretary, as we know, has a lot of authority in this case, and I think that this administration is going to be interested in those issues. Is there a subtlety to how they approach it? Yes, I think that there is, and my sense is further that I think they'll likely use good judgment here, because the nonprofit sector is so inextricably linked to who we are as Americans, and really it's one of our first freedoms. That is how we choose to give money away and support things and so forth. But there is a sense, I think, in the public that some of these organizations, these 501c3s in particular, have crossed lines and are dabbling in things that they shouldn't. So let's hope for the best. Kevin, let me ask you two other quick questions before we close. One, you could listen to this webinar and think you're a financial services company. It's like, hey, I'm looking at 4 good years. This is like open field running. You guys have basically described an environment that is sounding pretty good to me. Pump the brakes of caution on that. I mean, can investigations come? Can letters come from the Hill? Where are those pressures coming?
Absolutely. Letters will come. They will come they can still come from committee chairs. They can come from the ranking members. Now, ranking members don't have subpoena authority. They can't compel on the record testimony, but they can write letters, and they have a lot of ink and they have a lot of paper, and they can issue a lot of press releases and post on social media when they see things that they don't like. Senator Elizabeth Warren is going to be the new ranking member of the Banking Committee. Her office has been very aggressive in conducting oversight out of her personal Senate office. Now that will move to a committee structure, more staff that can supplement the senator's personal office. Lots of letters can come there. Ranking Member Waters, very aggressive with oversight, and will continue that oversight. But there are investigations, Peter, that are ongoing, right? Chairman Jordan, Chairman Comer have investigations that have not ended. Those can continue into the new year. If they were trying to rush a final report, They don't have to rush a final report now. If folks were trying to run out the clock potentially, that clock is now restarted, or they flipped the hourglass, right? So be on the lookout. Letters will come, inquiries will come. There will be, the oversight is going to be balancing, looking at both the Trump administration and the private sector. So you'll have dueling oversight or competing oversight time, but don't just think we're not going to get any letters or inquiries over the next 2 years for the coming Congress.
Well, Kevin, this has been really insightful. I've learned a lot. You and I are in touch every day.
Yes.
And I learned even more from listening to you and your insights today. And I know the audience feels the same way. So thank you. If you everybody want to look at your calendars, where Kevin and I are going to do this again on December 16th, which is Monday at 2 p.m. Eastern time. We're going to unpack further more personalities that will be in place. And we will also visit some of the crypto discussions that have been ongoing and have a robust discussion on those. So on behalf of BakerHostetler, look at your watches, 30 minutes, you're in and out. I think we hit our time mark. If we can be helpful to you in any way, Kevin and I are both happy to get on a call and go in further detail on any of these things. So on behalf of the partners and leadership at BakerHostetler, thank you all and have a good day. Bye-bye.